The world keeps telling you to change, to improve, to evolve, to reinvent yourself. And yet, inside you, something resists. You wake up every day feeling a subtle pull back to the same thoughts, the same reactions, the same emotional patterns, the same version of yourself you've always been. You might want to change. You might promise yourself you'll stop reacting the same way, stop thinking the same self defeating thoughts, and still, you don't. It feels like an invisible gravity keeps pulling you back into an old orbit. Carl Jung would say this gravity is the psyche's deep loyalty to identity, even when that identity hurts, because the mind fears nothing more than the unknown, even when that unknown is freedom. We mistake our patterns for our personality. We confuse repetition with stability. But beneath the routines you defend so fiercely lies a simpler truth. You learned who to be in order to stay safe. You built ways of speaking, reacting, holding yourself, not because they were true, but because they worked. They were survival codes, invisible agreements you made with life so you could belong. The same sarcasm, the same defensiveness, the same humility that quietly hides your brilliance. All of it formed because at some point being that way protected you from pain. And once the psyche links identity to safety, it becomes addictive. Jung saw the ego, the I you think you are, not as false, but as incomplete. A mass consciousness wares to move through the social world, and like any role, you can get trapped inside it. You play the strong one, and suddenly you're not allowed to fall apart. You play the easygoing one, and suddenly you can't ask for what you need. You play the deep one, and suddenly joy feels childish. You forget you ever had a choice. The mask fuses to the skin. The performance becomes identity. And every time you say, that's just who I am, the psyche whispers something quieter. That's just who I was allowed to be. Because identity forms around what was once rewarded and what was punished. You didn't just learn who you were, you learned who you were not allowed to become. When kindness was praised, you doubled down on kindness. When anger was rejected, you exiled it. Over time, those exiled parts didn't disappear. They became ghosts, still alive, still influencing you, but unseen. And you begin to feel haunted by your own incompleteness. The addiction to sameness is really an addiction to predictability. The ego fears contradiction. It fears discovering it might be more than it claims. Change feels like death to the identity that once kept you safe. That's why people sabotage their own healing, not because they don't want peace, but because peace would require becoming someone new. And someone new doesn't yet know how to survive in the old world. Jung called this process individuation, the integration of what we rejected. The task is not to destroy the ego, but to loosen its grip, to remember that every identity you've ever worn was a response, not a truth. When you begin to see this, the cracks in your personality stop feeling like failures. They start feeling like invitations. The assertive part of you, the sensitive part, the unpredictable part, they want to come home. Notice how, when you're alone, you sometimes glimpse another version of yourself, softer, truer, unperformed. But the moment you step back into the world, you tense up, you slip back into costume. The old self is rehearsed, practiced, known. The new self is still learning its lines. The addiction to the old you is an addiction to certainty, even when that certainty cages your aliveness. And yet, there's something compassionate about this addiction. You didn't cling to sameness because you were weak. You clung to it because once it made sense. Your nervous system learned that survival meant repetition, that consistency meant love, that surprise might mean abandonment. So the psyche decided better to be predictable than to be alone. That's why every attempt to change brings both hope and fear. You're not just changing habits, you're challenging the emotional logic of your past. The parts of you that were suppressed never die. They surface in dreams, in certain emotions, in impulses you can't explain. Jung said the unconscious compensates. What is rejected returns disguised. That's why you feel anger without knowing why. Why certain patterns keep repeating. They're not enemies, they're unlived lives asking for attention. There's grief inside every transformation, the grief of letting go of the self that once protected you,
Growth requires mourning who you were. You're not just becoming something new. You're laying to rest the version of you that kept you safe when you didn't know how. And in that farewell, something sacred begins. You start to see how much of your life is repetition disguised as choice, familiar partners, familiar conflicts, familiar emotional climates. The psyche seeks what it knows how to survive. If chaos was familiar, you'll recreate it. If silence was safety, you'll chase it, even in love. Jung called this the complex, an emotional not repeating until it's made conscious. You're not cursed, you're consistent, and consistency is the psyche's attempt to heal through repetition. Awareness breaks the loop, but awareness feels like betrayal to an identity built on suffering. That's why growth feels lonely. When you change, some people try to pull you back, not out of malice, but fear. Your transformation disrupts the unspoken agreement of who you were supposed to be. The old version of you was safe, predictable, expected, but the psyche grows impatient with disguise, anxiety, numbness, exhaustion. They're not failures, they're signals. Jung believed neurosis was the soul demanding wholeness. The symptom is the symbol. Identity is deeply sensory. You recognize yourself through familiar emotions, familiar shame, familiar pride, familiar boredom. To change emotionally feels like dissolving. But if you stay with the discomfort long enough, you realize it isn't death, it's expansion. What dies is the exclusivity of the old self. What's born is something larger. When you allow contradiction, that you can be kind and cruel, brave and afraid, something inside relaxes. Wholeness replaces perfection. You stop trying to be good, you start trying to be real. Longing appears not because something is wrong, but because you've outgrown who you're living as. Authenticity is not choosing oneself forever, it's being honest with your multiplicity. The fear beneath sameness is the fear of being seen differently. But what if being seen is safer than being admired? Transformation doesn't happen through control, it happens through surrender. You stop managing your becoming and let it move through you. Synchronicities appear. Life mirrors your inner shift. Each awakening costs comfort, but it brings truth. And somewhere between who you were and who you're becoming, you find yourself suspended, not lost, gestating. Jung called this the crucible of individuation. Beneath the noise of identity, a quieter voice emerges, the observer, the awareness beneath the masks.